They were the heart of America's vast transportation network. Young boys dreamed of sitting at the throttle. They would break land speed records and change the course of a nation.
As a child, I knew what I wanted to do, and I was raised not too far from the railroad track. And I can remember going out sitting on the bank, just 6 and 7 years old, and watching the trains pull up that heavy grade and saying to myself, one of these days I'm going to be making them do that.
A big part of our mission here is telling the story of passenger train service. And a passenger train wouldn't be a passenger train without a locomotive.
Well, the focal point of the whole consist is the engine. You just can't have a train without an engine.
More than 3 decades after the last passenger train departed its station, a group of railroad enthusiasts from Bowling Green, Kentucky imagined they might find an historic locomotive to sit at the head of their train set. It was a world-altering invention. They were created to harness horsepower and move goods and people faster than anyone had ever imagined. The first successful locomotive engine was invented in England in 1804 by Richard Trevithick. For the cost of a mere shilling, the public was invited to view an invention that was faster than a horse. But it would take nearly 2 decades before the invention crossed the Atlantic to America.
When you talk about early steam locomotive history, there are at least a half a dozen railroads and locomotives that claim to be the first of this or the first of that in the country. And the one that gets the most credit is the Sturbridge Lion, as the first commercial steam locomotive operation in the United States.
The locomotive amazed all who watched it operate on a warm August day in 1829. And although its weight strained the wooden track on the 3-mile round trip, it demonstrated that the transformation from equine horsepower to mechanical horsepower was not only feasible, but inevitable. In August 1830, Peter Cooper's Tom Thumb made a 26-mile round trip for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. The American-made locomotive reached the speed of 18 miles per hour, considered so fast that some of the passengers made notes to ensure that humans could function at such high speeds. By 1840, a few dozen miles of track had grown to over 3,000, and the great era of railroading in America had begun.
Well, I think people were, at least progressive thinking folk, were excited about the possibilities of railroads. By the 1850s, of course, the technology had improved, and railroads were able to offer a service that was dependable and generally satisfactory, and so much better than any previous transportation form that the cities and the communities in the areas interested in railroads were quite anxious to have it.
All over America, railroad companies began to form. The Louisville and Nashville Railroad was chartered by the state of Kentucky in 1850. The L&N would grow into one of the great success stories of American business. With the original L&N main line just 25 feet from their display track, the historic rail park and train museum begins its search for a locomotive.
Our engine had to be one that fit the period of the consist that we have at our rail park. And this consist told the story of passenger train service, and it was in the 40s and 50s in the diesel area.
An extensive search determines there is only one original L&N passenger diesel that remains intact. The E6, number 770, is part of the collection at the Kentucky Railway Museum.
We really wanted the 770 here, and E6 would truly tell the story, the very first locomotive, diesel locomotive, to pull out of this train station. However, After a long period of trying to convince them that this was the best place for the 770, they didn't accept our offer.
That didn't work. So we moved up the line to the next best thing, which turned out to be the E8A.